going on, everybody? Welcome into Week 2 NFL DFS breakdown. Happy for you guys to join in. Glad to be back doing another week. As always, be sure to drop any questions in the chat as I go. I'm going to go position by position here through the slate. Want to show you guys a couple things here on the sheet that if you weren't here last week that we've added for this year. Before we get into that, be sure to check out in the description of the video. You can grab a copy of our cheat sheet. You can see all of our content packages, so be sure to check those out. $25 for a month for all sports to get a copy of these sheets. So a couple things that we also, if you guys have not caught some of our most recent shows, we also have a 15% off discount code with Ship It Nation that they gave us, which is nice. So be sure to check them out. That will give you a free week trial to their site. They do a lot of NFL stuff. And they complement us very well with pricing and things like that. So be sure to check them out. If you haven't already, I'd say they got a lot of their content already up for the week as well. Fixing a couple feeds that are coming into the sheet I just noticed look like they're broke. Hopefully I can get those fixed pretty quickly. But it's going to be a fun one. There's a lot of we'll call it chalk on the slate when you start looking at ownership and things, especially at running back. I think there's going to be condensed ownership in a few spots. Really at every position, I think there's a little bit of that everywhere across the slate. Quite a bit different from last week, I think. Seems like it's going to be pretty soft in terms of the pricing in some of these builds and what you can get to. We had, of course, some injuries that happened, quite a few things like that have really opened up this pricing for us to build teams this week. So as we did last week, we're going to go position by position. The couple things that we've added is this team matchups tab, just like we have for college football. And you can get kind of an overview of each team and then look at, by their depth chart as to how they rate out player-wise at different positions. You can see target shares. You can see the projections that feed in. You can see ADOT, air yards, receptions, targets per game, rushes per game, quarterback, all their stats for every game of the slate throughout the entire weekend. We still have our odds board that we've always had. You can get some DVP spots from that. And then we, of course, have all the positional tabs. You're going to see highlights on both the team matchups and the position by position. And then later tonight, I will have all of my top target rankings up and along with notes and the core plays, which we've already got 3 of those up for cash games. The other thing that we added in addition to the team matchups tab was our DK and FanDuel stack tool that we used have for college football that we've transferred that over to here. Really like this tool. I'm going to sort it here as we get going. And what it does, just to give you guys a high-level overview if you've not used it or seen it before, it takes all of, in this case, you've got the quarterback, the wide receiver 1, 2, and 3, and the tight end 1. It does all the different combinations of those stacks to see, all right, what would be these are double stacks, but projection of those three, the pricing of those three, and the point per dollar value on those three. So then out here in this column, you're going to get what is the best stack for each team in terms of double stacking. And I know double stacking is not the, you don't have to double stack by any means. But what is the best double stack on the slate with pricing and projections? If you're just looking at a specific team, what does that come out to? So really nice way to zoom in on stacking a little bit, and already seeing some spots that I like on those as well. So I did not get a chance to go through the injuries. Of course, I've been tied up a lot with college today. So haven't updated the sheet really with injuries. We've got a little bit of news. I mean, we already knew. I'm just skimming back through Twitter through some of this news on Underdog. We already knew Jordan Love was probably out. Looks like he's for sure going to be out. Jameson Williams will play. I've already reflected that. Interesting, not for tomorrow, but for Monday night, that A.J. Brown is now questionable. Deshaun Bailey, I'm not sure that I got that one updated. He will be out. Yep, we already got that one for Denver. So most of these should be good to go. We already had Ferguson out. Damian Pierce. Not a lot of big news that's came in here. Of course, that's for tomorrow night. So the only one, I'm going to assume FanDuel still has that game on the slate, the Sunday night game. So we'll just go ahead and hop right in, go position by position, start with the quarterbacks, which we're going to talk a little bit about stacking here, MD, as we get into quarterbacks. And let's see here. Before I get into that, I got a question. ETN/Ford, pick one, full PPR. Let's see where we come out here. ETN versus Ford. In terms of PPR projection, we have ETN right around 13 and Ford right around 17. I think I agree with that. I was just talking, some of you guys are the names I don't recognize quite as much maybe from the Discord, but Josh, who's a member of our team, we were just talking in the Discord, and he really likes Ford tomorrow. He was giving me some names of people that, that I could mention for him that on the show that I didn't have highlighted in terms of top plays. So I think it's Ford. For me here, our projections agree. Some of our team members agree. So I'll lean toward Ford in that answer. Keep dropping the questions in. I love answering the questions, going back and forth. Want to make this as interactive as we can, not just me talking to you guys. So as we get into quarterbacks here for DK, you've got some of these price tags that have opened up at other positions. I think will allow you to do pretty much whatever you want at quarterback. Lamar, Mahomes, Anthony Richardson are in the top range of pricing. Lamar is kind of a level above the others at 77 on DraftKings. Mahomes is at 7, Richardson 68. Out of that top range, I think the way I view it is Mahomes is a safer option. We haven't seen him just blow up over the last couple of years a whole lot. I mean, not very frequently, I would say, but we know he's got the upside. We know, or I would think he gets up for a game like this against Cincy. And they seem to be reeling a little bit just overall in general, that team. So I would lean him in terms of, single entry cash of the very top range. As you get into multi-entry stuff, I think Anthony Richardson has massive upside. I think he's a very good option against Green Bay in a game that I think Indy wins. They're 2.5-point favorites. Fairly low total there, but we know he can just smash with his legs. Of course, you can play him by himself. I don't think you have to force a pairing with him, but man, last week it could have been a big week for A.D. Mitchell if it wasn't for a couple missed throws from Richardson. So if I was pairing, and we'll start going back and forth with the team matchups tab here. If I was pairing Anthony Richardson, it would be with A.D. Mitchell. 4K, 5 targets last week, which was a 26% target share. Of course, Pittman got quite a bit. Pierce only had 3 targets, but he's the one that broke the big one. I think it's definitely A.D. Mitchell just because of the price tag for sure. I like, if I'm going to play a stack with a running quarterback that needs to get there with his legs, I would rather play a cheap receiver with him. So AD would be the top pairing with him. If you're looking at Mahomes, if we zoom in on Kansas City, Rashee Rice is going to be really popular this week. I think rightfully so. Worthy's a little too highly priced based on the volume that we saw last week, but I do think they continue to work him into this game or into this offense more and more. 61 is just a tough tag to get to when you can pay 600 more and get the alpha in this offense now. In Rashee Rice, who had a 32% target share in week 1, over 100 yards. Worthy, 2 catches for 47 and had a rushing touchdown, I believe. So he, definitely made the most of his opportunity, and I think he'll get more and more. But just kind of a tough ask at 6,100, maybe a GPP flyer there. Kelsey, I'm not very big on. I think those other 2 big playmakers are going to take a little bit more away from him. 6,200 is fair, though. And if you're playing a lot of Mahomes, say you're playing around 20 teams, doing a 20 max or something, I would include Kelsey for sure in the pool. You're probably going to want all 3 of those guys, and maybe even Justin Watson. Probably not. Probably just Worthy, Rice, and Kelsey if you're playing 20 and you're pretty heavy on Mahomes there. I think Mahomes is a very good cash option. As we start dropping on down, you've got Kyler Murray at 66. GPP look for me on the other side of that Rams game where we're playing. Probably we'll get to a lot of these skill position players for the Rams. You've got Jaden Daniels, who ran 16 times last week for 88 and 2 touchdowns. Will he continue to run that much? I think so. I mean, it's part of his game. We saw it a lot through college. He gets the Giants here. I think we could see a little bit of back and forth here. Not a massive total at 43.5, but close spread. Washington has a really bad defense. The front of New York is pretty good. So, I think that just forces Daniels to have to run a little bit more than maybe he wants to. I think it's probably between Mahomes and Jaden Daniels for like a cash game quarterback. I think both are, in play in all formats. Daniels at 6,200, he's another one of those guys that I really don't want to force a pairing with. McLaurin, De'Ami Brown, there's just not many options there for this offense. I suppose it would be McLaurin, but he didn't look very good last week. 4 targets, 2 for 17 is all he had. Didn't get involved a lot down the field. If I was going to pair someone with Daniels, probably would be Zach Ertz, who just seemed to be getting the check down looks. Wasn't very good for DFS last week, but he could get in the end zone. He could be that guy for them. A safety blanket for Jaden Daniels. So I think that's in play, but definitely Daniels by himself is an option. Last week we had Baker, who really smashed in the afternoon there against Washington. Um, he gets Detroit here in the biggest total on the slate at 51. They're 7.5-point dogs right now. So I still think this is a solid spot for this offense. Detroit defense didn't look that good last week. I think Baker, Evans, Godwin, I think that's a very in-play stack again here. 5,900 is very fair price tag, a very fair price tag for him. Justin Fields is 54. I think that makes sense. He ran it 14 times last week. Completed a good chunk of his passes, just wasn't really throwing it down the field a whole lot. I think he could definitely get there against Denver. It's not a very imposing matchup. The Broncos aren't very tough, really, defensively. So I think Fields could definitely get there. But I would actually prefer, and this is going to sound kind of sick, Daniel Jones down there at 53, super cheap, going up against the coveted matchup with Washington that we've really been targeting for all through last year and now again to start this year. I think you can do it. And 5,300, you can pair him up with Malik Neighbors, who's going to be fairly popular, I think. Wan'Dale Robinson looked really good with 12 targets last week. They let Daniel Jones throw it 42 times a week ago. I think that, if he continues that, I think it's very in play is Neighbors, Wan'Dale, maybe even a Theo Johnson tight end punt at 26. I can get behind playing some of this offense against a bad D. And I don't even think you have to run anything back. Kind of like we talked about with Daniels, you don't have to pair him up. I don't think, of course, you have to run something back on Washington just because you play a Jones plus Neighbors or a Jones plus Wan'Dale or something like that. So that's where I'm at really with quarterback. I think that is it. If you guys have anybody else that you want me to talk about, let me know. I don't have anybody else that I am really interested in from quarterback. I suppose Dak would be okay. That was another stack that Josh on our team really liked. Was Dak plus CD. Sounded like that was going to be one of his big stands of the week. New Orleans isn't super scary by any means. And Dak does have these blow-up games. He doesn't really have a rushing attack, in my opinion. So it's going to be a lot more on his shoulders. So I think you could get there for sure. We talked a little bit about Kyler, and if you're stacking Kyler up, who do you pair with? And I think the clear answer to that is Trey McBride, who is $6K on DraftKings and only 62 on FanDuel, which is really cheap. 9 targets for him a week ago and just really didn't produce overall fantasy-wise. But if he continues to get 9 targets a game, I think you have to have interest. Does Marvin Harrison get back, get involved here this week? I don't really know that I want to take that chance again. So I think it would definitely be McBride would be my favorite of the bunch if you're pairing him. So that's where I'm at. We'll talk more maybe about that game and some run backs or using McBride as a run back on a stack of LA here in just a bit. Moving on to running back, we have McCaffrey, who's going to be out, which opens up probably the chalkiest spot of the slate at running back is Jordan Mason, who looked really good on Monday night. He's only 5,200. You don't really care the matchup if he's going to get 28 carries again. I think he's a cash lock and very in play in all formats. No matter the ownership, it's just one of those plays where he should be upper sixes or something, if not more. And they just didn't price him up after what happened Monday. I think the slate might have already been out. So back to the top of pricing, Breece Hall seems to be the most popular here at the top at 74. I think a nice pivot to him would be Jonathan Taylor going up against Green Bay, who we saw Barkley just shred last week on the Friday game in Brazil. So I think that is a nice pivot. And Jonathan Taylor was kind of the only running back doing anything for Indy last week. So really like that play for tournaments. But Breece Hall looks to be the workhorse. He gets involved in the pass game. Rodgers was checking down 5 for 39 to him last week through the air on 6 targets. The aforementioned Rams, we've got Kyron Williams at 68. A really good option going up against this Arizona defense. Another workhorse guy. Right below him, you've got quite a few tournament options. Derrick Henry, I think the game script is going to fit him for Baltimore going up against the Raiders. Jahmyr Gibbs, and probably the best game environment on the slate, is a 7.5-point favorite. I think he is very involved in this offense. He could have a big day. And then James Conner would be another one of those run backs for Arizona. And he looked like he was going to get a massive load early on in that game last week. And, it just kind of worked out where he ended up with 16 for 50 and 1, and then a few targets where it could have been even more. So I think he's a solid option. In that mid-range, you're probably ranking them Kyron, Gibbs, Henry, Connor is where I would have that right now. As we drop on down, still a couple more really good plays, and Zach Charbonnet with Kenny Walker out going up against New England. Not the greatest matchup, but again, he's cheap and should be the lead guy here for Seattle. He gets involved in the passing game as well. Had a touchdown through the air last week. J.K. Dobbins looked really good on 10 carries a week ago, pushed up over 130 yards, had a touchdown. This is another good spot for them against Carolina, who looks just dead pretty much. So he's a nice tournament option. Not a ton else at running back. I mean, Kamara going up against Dallas, just don't love that. ETN don't love it against Cleveland. Pacheco is in play going up against Cincy. Stevenson had a big volume day last week with 25 carries playing from ahead. He is always scary for me to click. No matter, I know that volume is going to be there in the right game script, but if they fall behind, I worry a little bit. But he does get involved in the passing game some as well. Aaron Jones found the end zone last week. Hate the matchup against San Francisco. I think David Montgomery is also a decent play. Kind of like Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs is kind of the more versatile, get out in open space type guy, where Montgomery is going to probably run in between the tackles. Not really get involved in the passing game, but 17 carries for 91 last week. He sealed that game with the touchdown. Then you got Pollard going up against the Jets, who just kind of looked lost against Jordan Mason on Monday night. I suppose you could go there, but I'm not enthused. Jerome Ford, I think he's definitely in play against Jacksonville. We've talked about him a little bit earlier. The rest of running back, I don't have a ton of interest. Najee Harris is fairly cheap, 20 carries. There's been some wording about Jaylen Warren nursing some injuries. He only had 2 carries last week, so you could maybe lean into that a little bit more if you wanted to. But that's it at running back. I think overall you're looking Breece, Kyron, Charbonnet, and Mason are the top 4. I'll have those ranked in an order here after we get off the show. And then for tournaments, I think Jonathan Taylor and Jahmyr Gibbs and Derrick Henry are all three really good options at running back. Moving on to receiver, we've already talked about these a little bit in the stacking section, and we're going to look at the stack tools here in a bit as well. But at the top of pricing, you got CeeDee Lamb against New Orleans. I think that's very. I think CD could have a really good day. 10 targets a week ago, just didn't really produce a whole lot. Cooper Kupp is going to be the popular one up here. Puka out, of course. 21 targets for Cooper Kupp last week. I think you're expecting double digits in that category. 7,600 against Arizona. I think he's, cash game, another cash game lock that you can plug in there. And, you can play him in any format with that volume. Amon-Ra was, had a down week last week, really down. Still had a couple red zone targets that could have bailed him out maybe a little bit. So I think Amon-Ra is really interesting in tournaments as a 7.5 point favorite in a really good game environment. Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, pivot options. I don't love the matchup for Minnesota here. I think it's a little tougher on Darnold than it was last week. And then Chase, I don't know what's going on really with Kansas City. Just seems kind of like a mess right now. And I think it does get straightened out as the year goes. But I really don't want to touch that offense right now. Mike Evans, mentioned him. He's in play for tournaments in a stack with Baker or a run back from the other side of Detroit. Garrett Wilson looked really good early last week. Don't love the matchup here against Tennessee. But he looked really good early and it just kind of faded away. 11 targets. I guess you could play him. As we get into this next tier, it is definitely led by Deebo Samuel and Rashee Rice. Deebo looked like the number 2 running back on top of the fact he was getting involved in the passing game last week with no McCaffrey. 68, very, very cheap. Just a wrong price with the type of role that he's got going right now. So he would be the tops in this mid-range. Rice already talked about Kansas City stack a little bit here with Mahomes. I think Rice is the alpha, 9 targets. Last Thursday night, I think he's definitely in play. Chris Godwin looked really good a week ago, 8 targets, caught all of them for 83 and a touchdown. And again, we really like this game overall in Detroit. Sandwiched in between them, you've got Pittman, who had a nice volume game last week. Zay had the volume, but just really didn't have anything down the field. Worthy, we talked about him a little bit earlier. He's a GPP look. Amari Cooper, I just can't play anything that has to do with Deshaun Watson right now. Moving on down, we've talked about some of these guys already, but Jameson Williams looks like he's going to play. He looked really good last week for Detroit. Again, really good game environment, big play guy. As long as he seems like he's full go, I think 5,300 is just way too cheap for a 9 targets and a big play ability guy that we saw what he could do a week ago. So I think he's a very interesting one. I was going to try to see what his ownership is looking. I think maybe with the injury and, just seems to me like he's going to get a little bit overlooked. I could be completely off on that, but let's see here. Yeah, under 7% So I think that's a really good option in tournaments at 53. You got Ladd McConkey, who looked pretty good last week, 7 targets, scored a touchdown. Not a whole lot down the field, and I don't know how much we're going to see down the field from this Harbaugh offense, but Palmer's questionable. We might not see a ton of him. So I think that opens up even more for Ladd McConkey. So he's in play at 4,900. That's just pretty cheap. As we work on down, got a few value options that we can go to. I'll start at the bottom, and we've got Alan Lazard, who kind of got there. I don't want to say he got there late last week, but on Monday night, he was the whole first half. I don't think he had a catch in the first half. Had ended up then with 9 targets, 6 catches for 89 and 2. One of those came with Tyrod in at the end of the game in garbage time. But 3,300, if he's going to get even 5 or 6 targets, that's just too cheap for him. And he got targeted in the red zone quite a bit. So you have to have some interest in him, but he will be pretty popular. I think in cash games, you can go ahead and just play him. In tournaments, I think you can get away. You've got a pivot down below in Tyler Johnson for LA with no Puka. He could step into that role. I think that's a viable option. He had 7 targets last week in that situation after Puka went out, 5 for 79. I think he's an interesting pivot at much lower ownership. And then as we work our way up, we talked a little bit about Wandale at 43 in a really good matchup with Washington. He had 12 targets a week ago. Yoshi at 38, I think you could go back to him. 6 targets. Didn't really do a whole lot. 5.6 DK points last week, 3 for 26. But I think you could run him back, especially if you're doing like a Mahomes, Rice, and then run Yoshi back on the other side for under 4K. I think that's in play. We already talked a little bit about A.D. Mitchell. Demarcus Robinson's in play with no Puka. He could get a few more looks as well. That's it at receiver for me. So there's a lot of value options at receiver. We got a cheap running back. Quite a bit of, like I said early on in the show, there's a lot of chalk here, which makes it, to me, a really good tournament slate where you can pivot off of some of those cheap, chalky guys, or I would much rather pivot off of like a Lazard, or, if one of those gets a bunch of ownership, as opposed to pivoting even off of like a Mason, where he has a big role and he's going to touch the ball a lot, almost for certain. All right, moving to tight end. We got kind of a condensed pool here at tight end this week as well. At the top, you got Travis Kelce, Laporta, Trey McBride would be my favorite of that group. We already talked about him a bit. I think you can play Kelce in stacks. Don't love him without Mahomes. Laporta, I think he could have a bounce back here, 4 for 45, but great game environment. I think you can go to him. Trey McBride, again, we already talked about him, 9 targets last week. Really like the spot here at 6K. If you can get up to him, we saw likely way outperform Mark Andrews to start the year. I think you could play. You could make a case for either one of those. Is it likely who continues, or, do you take a super, super under-owned Mark Andrews here? I think you could make the case. Brock Bowers looked pretty good. 8 targets last week, 6 for 58. I always liked him in college. Tough matchup, but I think he could get their own volume for sure. Is Brock Bowers. Pat Fryermuth, I think, is a good option. We'll get to. I've already seen the stack tool a little bit. Look like he was popping as a part of that we'll get to in a bit. And I think you could go to him. And then down in the cheap range, we got Colby Parkinson, who's probably going to be the most popular tight end at 3,100. He looked pretty good early on there. 5 targets, 4 for 47. And now, with no Puka, maybe he steps in and gets a little more work in the passing game as well. So I think he's a good play. What's the upside, I guess, would be the question for him and any of these super cheap guys down here. Jordan Akins is going to step in for the injured Njoku for Cleveland. Again, don't really like tying anything to Deshaun Watson, but he is cheap here at $3K and probably lower on than Parkinson if you want to look at it that way. Dulcich, 2,900, decent punt if you need to, going up against Pitt. Three targets last week. I think it's is kind of what it looks like. And then we talked a little bit about Theo Johnson, who had 4 targets, caught 1 for 18 last week. If you are playing Daniel Jones, I think he's a large field pairing with him there. That pretty much wraps it up. I mean, we can talk about defense a little bit, and then we'll look at the stack tool and really just get on out of here. We got the Chargers going up against Carolina. We saw a big week from New Orleans last week, so 34 is probably a fair tag for them. The Jaguars going up against Deshaun Watson in Cleveland at 31, I think, are in play. Denver going up against Pitt. I think they can get pressure on Justin Fields, who likes to take sacks. The Patriots get Seattle. I think they're definitely in play. Pittsburgh on the other side of that game gets Bo Nix, who just kind of looks shaky to me, and he always has, even in college. But he had some big outings for Oregon, of course. But I think this front for Pittsburgh can cause him some problems tomorrow for sure. Indy gets Green Bay and Malik Willis. So I think you got to have some interest in them. And then down at the very bottom, you can make a case for pretty much anybody. Arizona gets the Rams. Don't hate taking a little bit of leverage there when there's so many Rams that we like. I think you can definitely play like in cash games. Speaking of the Rams, let's take a look at that because I wanted to talk about maybe stacking this up. And I don't think you have to do it with the quarterbacks. It could be your secondary stack on your team. You do like a quarterback and receiver, and then you run Kyron and Parkinson and Connor or something like that, or Cup and Parkinson even. I think you can play 2 receivers without Stafford. Can you play Stafford? Yeah. He just needs to get the touchdowns. And I think it could happen. We like a lot of pieces. Could those pieces drag Stafford with them? I think he definitely could. So this is, one of the games that I think I could see stacking up both sides. Similar to the Washington and New York game, where it's not the highest total, but I think you could play some on both sides. I think you could definitely do like a Jaden Daniels plus a Neighbors on the other side and just get access that way. But again, I don't think if I'm playing Daniel Jones, I'm probably not running back with anybody from Washington. And then with the Tampa Bay Detroit game with the highest total, I think you can play some on both sides of that one. You can play Baker with Evans, Godwin, Cade Otton, and then run it back with Jameson Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra. All those guys could be run backs. So really like that option as well. Or you can do just do a small secondary stack of Godwin plus Jameson Williams and get access to the same game there. Let's take a look at our stack tool. if you guys have any questions, drop them in the chat and I'll answer them before we get out of here. But as we look at the DK stack tool, and if you all missed it earlier on, I explained kind of what this is doing. We added this to our NFL sheet for the year. We've had it on college for the last couple. But looks like in terms of best double stacks, the Giants actually rate out by quite a bit in point per dollar as the number one double stack. And you got the matchup. Looks like something is not really feeding right. So I'm going to have to take a look at this. The opponent's not feeding right, but I know this is correct. So you got Washington going up against the Giants, and you got Neighbors plus Wandale. Those price tags are very easy to get to. So I think that's definitely in play. The Rams with Parkinson and Tyler Johnson kind of rate out really well, taking the cheap options. Sutton plus Josh Reynolds with Bo Nix is actually rating out decent. I'm not a big fan of that at all. Freiermuth and Pickens with Justin Fields rates out up there pretty good as well. Yeah, so I think it's going to be a Daniel Jones week. It's going to be a Danny Dimes week for me, which isn't something I love hitching my wagons to. But, hey, I think you can make it make quite a bit of sense. In terms of single stacks, again, you're kind of looking out with that's something I could look at adding to the sheet. Quarterback with one, instead of doubling all these up, add in to where you could pull best single stack and best double stack. Maybe I'll look into that. But I mean, you can kind of do so with just picking out, the best point per dollar receiver on the team if you wanted to do it that way. But it's not really meshing the quarterback pricing in there as well. But I think Daniel Jones in either of those, Wandale or Neighbors, is going to look really good. So that's where I'm at for this week. If there are no questions, I'm probably going to hop off of here, get these rankings up for you guys. Again, if you haven't checked us out, the description of the video has links to check out our site that gives you the ability to purchase access to our Discord, which is where you get copies of the sheets for all sports that we cover. And we got a lot going on right now. We've got NFL, college football, golf is still going on through the fall, MLB through the World Series, NASCAR with all series. We had Xfinity today. We got Cup tomorrow. And we've got you covered with that. Josh and I will be doing a show in the morning for that one. NHL will be back soon. DOB will have you guys covered with that. NBA will be back. Soccer is full swing. We have that going on, and I'll have that tomorrow as well. UFC, got a lot of guys talking in there, talking about UFC stuff tonight. So, in college basketball will be back before you know it, and that's a big one for us as well. We love some college basketball. So if you haven't checked us out, just give us a shot. If you want to do one sport, you can do that. If you want to do all sports, you can do that. If you got any questions, feel free to reach out to me in the Discord, and I'd be happy to answer them. If you want to leave a comment on this video, I'll be happy to answer questions there as well. Good luck to everybody this week. Hope to see you back next week. We're gonna try to do these each and every week. If you haven't caught a lot of our shows before, we have this one, we have the NASCAR Cup show, and we have the college football show that we do every Friday night. So be sure to check those out as well. Good luck to everybody on Sunday, and we'll see you next week.